Hello, everyone. Welcome to another coding and philosophy podcast. I'm Juho.
And I am T.
Yep. And this time, I will bring into this discussion. I've been reading a book. I'll show to the camera about leadership.
Leadership.
Yeah, and it described pretty well how we as people, how we efficiently learn. And there's really 3 steps to how you, let's say I'm me right now and I want to learn a new skill.
Mm-hmm.
What is the fastest way to get there? This book described a method of how you get there. First, you have to have a lived experience, let's say. Oh, no, let's not get that. First, you have to have some strategizing.
Some strategizing.
Yeah, you have to figure out, okay, what is it that, let's say, I'm gonna do and how I'm gonna do it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I want to learn something. Okay.
An orientation in mind, I imagine. An orientation in mind.
Exactly. Almost couldn't hear you there. But yeah, so you have that. Yeah, so you have the strategy first. And then the next step is to go through the lived experience, meaning that you just do whatever you're doing. Like it could be work, or it could be you're doing the courses, or it could be whatever you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Lived experience.
The execution.
Exactly, the execution. And the third part is the critical self-reflection after going through the lived experience. Basically, just analyzing what you did and how you could have done it better, and so on. And the way we see this in the school I'm in right now is that we have these things called Motorola's.
Motorola.
Yeah.
Can you care explaining what Motorola is?
Sure. So Motorola, it's basically just a term for after we have our class or our workshops. We don't have classes. We have like workshops. We at the end of it, we usually discuss. Okay, what went well?
What went well?
What did I learn?
Mm-hmm.
What could be improved? And what will I take into practice from this? So yeah, you have a self-reflection session, and yeah, this is basically like in the last episode we talked about retrospectives
In the sprint in agile methodology in software development.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So it ties into software development as well, because if you want to have a, let's say, good output, or if you want to, in whatever you're doing, if it's software development or something else, you want to see these patterns repeated. So you want to strategize how you're going to do something, have a sprint planning session, for example. And then you want to have the sprint, the lived experience. And then you want to have the retrospective, where going reflection, basically.
Mm. So while reading the book about leadership, you gain a framework to approach learning, and you just find that the same pattern is applicable to the software development world. During the sprint, there is planning, the sprint, and retrospection day. And that the same is the same pattern you have read it through this book.
Mm. And I would argue that the best, let's say, the optimal way, wherever you have a software development team, is that you have these 3 things in perfect balance, in perfect harmony, in some capacity. Meaning that because I think a lot of, companies, rightly so, they focus on the output, on the actual content of the sprint, without having these self-reflection days or these retrospectives. I know some software development teams who have them, don't even have them, they just do. And I would say that's dangerous because, what is the definition of insanity? Is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting things to change.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you're not reflecting as a team, then I would say you're not really improving your processes. You're not learning how to work together.
I can see.
Yeah. So I would say, but the challenge, of course, is that companies need to produce output much more than they need to, let's say, refine their processes oftentimes.
Yes, company needs to output because that's the livelihood, but refine the process, increase the efficiency and the capacity for them to produce. So the refinement process allows them that given a same input or less input, they can produce more. So that's the promise that's investment in refinement brings.
Yeah, that's the thing. But it's, I think a lot of managers, it's hard to see that, the importance of the refinement, because it's hard to measure that refinement. You can always, it's very easy to measure output. How many tasks did you get done? How much work did you get done? But how well did you perform on a retrospective day, for example? I think that's it's hard to measure that stuff, which makes it seem less important, even though it is important.
It is harder to important because you are relying on hypothesis and scenario that had not happened yet. So it can be quantified, such as in a scenario that we invest on refinement, then we may be able to have a better productive process. Then compare that with a scenario that we skip the retrospective and just purely on outputting, then what is the difference? And if there is benefit in doing that, then that's the quantification there. It's justification for the retrospective day. But it's hard to quantify because it's just a hypothesis. We are trying to imagine a scenario that has not happened yet. But that's happened at every planning. We have to live with a certain assumptions.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough to measure that stuff. That's something I learned. How do you and actually, the hardest part in our retrospectives in Dashboard was to find what will we take into practice? How will we improve the next sprint? Like actual hard things to do, right? We often just kind of ended up discussing how using it as a way to team bonding, just explaining, hey, here's something good that happened to me during the week, and here's something good. So just we would, use it as a team bonding experience rather than using it as an experience to how can we make the next week for ourselves better, because that's what it's all about. Is that it's a common interest within everyone, is that you want to have the next week better than the last one, or the next sprint better than the last one. So
that's the ideal scenario. Can it be used to take accountability with each other as well? So as you said, it's used for bonding, and it's also used for accountability, as in you revise what your contribution to the project is. Because you have to go through, this is what I've done, this is what I contribute. So that is the way that each teammate take each other accountable.
I would say I'm not a fan of the terminology used, like accountability, because that, in my mind, that means that a discussion that this was your responsibility, and I think you don't want to be looking for people to blame in after a sprint. You want to figure out. You don't want to look who's the guilty person. Basically, you want to get as far away as you can from that line of thinking.
Accountability here means you have your share of the portion of the work, right? You have your tickets, and that's the task you work on. Accountability here is, this is how I perform my work, and you present that to the entire team.
Yeah,
That's the kind of accountability I'm referring to.
It goes into when you answer the question, how could I have done better?
How could you have done better?
Yeah, I think that's a very important question to ask during those retrospectives.
Okay, then I realized that the introspection does not only involve with how the team works dynamically, but it can be boiled down to the level of the individual, of each programmer or software developer. They themselves can retrospectively analyze how they, as an individual, can become a better programmer and become a better productive producer.
Exactly. And you can also bring this to the discussion that here's what could have helped me. Here's how the other developers, my team members, could have helped me to do my work better.
Yes. It sounds to me that if you as a developer communicate that thing, it seems to me that it's a that action has manifest a productive retrospective day. Yeah, because that you reflect about what could improve during the next sprint, and you communicate that out and let people know.
Yeah, and here you said something. How do you determine if you had a productive retrospective day? And that's why, like I said, it's hard to measure that stuff because even though a sign of it is that you have something that you can use for the next sprint, like an actual thing. But
that's the best scenario then.
But it's very individual in a lot of ways.
Oh, it can be taken as an individual. Can we set a metric that if one participant in the retrospective know what to improve during the next sprint, then that can still be considered a good retrospective day.
That's true.
Yeah, so we don't view it at the level of the entire team, but we can still view it as a level of a success individually.
Yeah, and because that's the most important part of, well, like I mentioned, the Motorola is, but in retrospectives, how will you make the next sprint better? What are some actual practical things you can, because everything should culminate into that. Everything you're discussing in the retrospective should culminate into that. So, yeah. But the measurement, because it's so individualistic, a lot of now, like sometimes you do get that, hey, like in the previous podcast I mentioned, we had the idea of let's have our mics open and we're all constantly in this call, on a Slack call. So when we want to ask for help, we can always just do that quickly. Just unmute your mic and ask the question rather than writing a message, which sometimes can be daunting, and it increases the barrier for asking questions, which developer teams should be constantly doing, is constant communication. So there's no wasted work, wasted effort. Yeah. I think that's...
I still have room to talk, actually, because, because now the problem after a concern, a matter after the retrospective that bridges idea into implementation. Given that you know how to improve, how do you put that into practice? How do you put that into the planning and lift and while executing, you are actually bringing out the improvement, because Do you get my point?
Can you refine it a bit more? I'm not sure I understand.
In the retrospective, you identify things you can improve.
Mhm.
That's just an idea. How do you transfer those ideas into practice? That sometimes can be tricky.
Yeah, that's the trickiest part is how, because, ideas are cheap in a way.
You analyze a problem and you find that, hey, there's a problem. And if you find a solutions, how do you bring change during the next execution so that these solutions can be implemented?
Well, with that, I think we can ponder on that on our own times and say goodbye to you guys and see you on the next episode of Coding and Philosophy.
And remember, keep on coding,
And
philosophizing.
that's so. See you guys.